Hi, everybody. This is Jack Baldwin with Baldwin Architectural Group. We're really excited to be bringing you our third and final part of this series about the building process from the architectural perspective. Today, we're going to be covering the final phase of a typical architectural design project, and that phase is construction documentation. It's the final part of wrapping up an ideal project with on architectural design. I've got Christopher Baldwin with me. He's our lead architect who's going to be discussing this with us today. So we're excited to get the webinar started. How are you doing today, Christopher?
I'm doing fine, Jack. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. So let's, well, there we go. So we're going to be your hosts. I'm Jack Baldwin on the right. I'm our Vice President of Sales, also with marketing and a little bit of HR, a little bit of everything. We're a small business, so we kind of all wear multiple hats, but do everything to kind of keep our sales and marketing team going more than anything. Christopher's our president and founder. He's our lead architect. Been licensed since 1986. Started Baldwin Architectural Group about 10 years ago. But he has been a practicing architect for quite some time. So we're going to be drawing upon a wealth of information and experience from Christopher that I think is going to be beneficial to all of you guys. So I appreciate you tuning in, watching our webinar. We're really excited to share some, hopefully some good insights for you on the architectural design process. So real quick before we get started, just wanted to share a good quote with you that I think is apropos to the final stage of an architectural design process. Every task, goal, race, and year comes to an end, therefore make it a habit to finish strong. We kind of take that mentality toward this process. There's a lot of projects that can get started. But it's very important to have an architect who will work with you to the very end to make sure that the project comes to a completion with all deliverables met, all timelines met and communicated, and just done with excellence. We call that finishing strong when we try to finish the project. So what we're going to talk about today is all about how do you finish the project strong, what you do expect from an architectural firm that's going to be working with you on a design project. So this is the final phase that we're going to be talking about today. Just a quick recap on what we've already covered to bring you up to speed. Phase one was all about the discovery phase. That's where we get to know the client, get to know the vision and the dream that they have, get to know what they must have on the project and what they would like to have. We kind of rumble through that, is what we call it, to come up with a vision and a plan and start to put some visualization to the project at that point. When we start to get into phase two, which is development, that's where we actually start to put more and more design work into it. We're starting to get third-party contractors involved. We're starting to get some construction costs. It's moving the project along so that we're going to see this be a successful design. Phase three, what we're talking about today, is all about what do construction documents do? How do they help you? What are they? What do you need when you go get approval? So those are the questions Christopher is going to answer today. It's particularly around construction documents. We do have some questions that you guys submitted on the webinar form, and I am going to get to those. So it'll be fun to hear Christopher's answers on some pretty exciting questions that we also got. So Christopher, if you're ready, we're going to talk about construction documentation. Is that good?
We're ready.
All right. So very simply put, completing the project just means getting into that final phase. So when do we see the final phase usually start? What has to happen in order for the final phase to commence?
It's about getting everybody on the same page and make sure everybody's in agreement to the direction we're heading. Mm-hmm. So that way, if we don't want to come back with change orders later on to have to hit the client.
So really, that's great. So what we're saying is, when we've all reached a conclusion that we've heard the vision, we've designed it, we've got some concepts and some proposals. Now we've actually come into an agreement that we're ready to begin that final phase. So we don't start the final phase really until we've gotten into an agreement with the client that we're working with. They're ready to start the submission and approval process.
Right.
So in that final phase, those construction document phase, what are the deliverables that they should expect to get from us?
Well, they'll see a lot of the similar things that they got in the first two phases, but the main primary thing is going to be on that cover sheet.
Okay.
Cover sheet is going to cover all the existing codes that are required in that district. Most of the time, we're going to more international codes these days for residential and commercial. But those codes have to be applied to everything that goes into those construction documents.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's about life safety. It's about, is the building built and constructed correctly? So your engineers are all involved in that. It's also so the contractor knows what he's going to be building and how he's going to build it. So
right. That cover sheet is hugely important.
Yes.
So that's a big deliverable that we start to finalize and get into your hands, the client. When we say the client's hands, that cover sheet is very critical to getting their project off the ground, sounds like.
Yes.
What other deliverables do we get to the client at this phase?
Okay, the site plan's finalized. That has all the details from those engineers as well.
Okay.
And it shows where the building's going to sit on the new site.
Okay.
Next elements are all the floor plans, elevations, wall sections, cross sections, building sections, and then all the details that go with that.
Right.
So, and there's also all the handicap codes have to be applied to everything we do.
Yeah. So if you have most projects these days are going to have some kind of ADA requirements.
Correct.
So we're not going to miss that either. We're going to anticipate occupancy loads, handicap.
Correct.
Yeah. So really what you're telling me is at this point, these final construction documents empower the client quite a bit in order to get their project approved.
Yeah, and that's what we're saying is that the plan reviewers are the ones that are going to sit there and nitpick the heck out of everything we draw.
Right.
They're going to look for all those elements that are in there.
Right.
If we don't cover it, they're going to redline it, and we have to come back and correct it.
Right. And so it's our job to make sure that we're getting out in front of that as much as possible.
Correct.
Yes, there's some things that are unexpected. There are, but in our experience,
Uniqueness.
Yeah, then in our experience, inspectors are different, depending on the person.
Correct.
So as much as we can, these deliverables are designed to get out in front of and answer those questions ahead of time, so that your project will go smoothly, that the approval process will go smoothly. So we sounds like we provide a lot of documentation to make that happen.
Correct.
Right. Well, just broadly speaking, what are construction documents? So when you hear us say construction documents that we're going to deliver to you, the client, what are we talking about essentially?
Yeah, some of those things we just talked about: cover sheet, site plan, building plans, elevations, interior elevations. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
Too. Wall sections, building sections, and then all the section details that go with those elements.
So window and door schedules, are those also part of that?
Windows, doors, all those are elements. And what we typically say on those window and door schedules is we want the client to work with the contractor in determining the cost of those elements.
Right.
So we may go out and help you pick a certain brand or manufacturer, but we want you to be on the same track as far as your budget goes.
Right.
So that's how we do that.
Yeah, it sounds like construction document, there's a lot that goes into that.
Yes.
And all of those documents, every single one of them are designed with a purpose, and the purpose is to get your building approved.
Correct.
So we can break ground and see that dream become reality. A question that comes up a lot in my experience, and probably in your experience, Christopher, since you've been doing this for a long time, is why do we even need them stamped? So why do these construction documents need to be stamped by an architect? Is that important?
Yeah, and it has to do with, the city, the county, all these people. They're looking for somebody that's licensed because they want to make sure that a licensed person, there's licensed engineers, there's licensed contractors, and licensed architects. We are all the ones who are taking on the liability for the construction of all these things.
And so that stamp, when we put
Yes.
that on that construction document, that stamp represents that we're licensed,
Correct.
and it represents that we're taking on the liability
Correct.
of the soundness of the building,
Well, to make sure it's constructed properly.
Properly.
And that it doesn't fall over
Right.
due to some little thing that happens.
Yeah, so that's why it's so important to make sure that that stamp is on these construction documents,
Right.
and to make sure that your architect that you're working with is licensed.
Right.
That's not a foregone conclusion all the time, but it is important just to I mean, again, the question does come up. Why do I need this stamp? What does the stamp represent? And I thought it was important to have that question in here too. So, what about a change order? So does that happen often?
A lot of times change orders come, it may because of the entity that's doing their reviews and they come back with something that we weren't expecting. That has happened in the past. We don't always know what new things may come about. It may even be a district that may have some little thing that they want you to do.
Yeah.
So, but the change orders typically don't come up until construction begins.
Well, what about us? What happens if there's a change order?
Only if we're changing everything after we've already finished the first two phases. So if we have to go back and change it after it's already been approved by you, the client, that could be considered a change order. Yes.
So if there is a change order, would that be additional billable work?
Yes.
Okay. So we try to avoid change orders. Obviously, that's kind of you see where I was going with that. We try to avoid change orders as much as possible because, to your point, it can be costly.
Right.
And so I would think for our audience, for people who are listening and are interested in architecture, what they really want to do is, the expression in construction is measure twice, cut once.
That's it.
Exactly. And that's our approach towards architecture as well. We really do want those first two phases to be so thorough that by the time we give you construction documents, we don't want there to be a change order.
Right.
If there is, and to Christopher's point, we have to go back and redo a lot of the work we've already covered. That is a discussion we usually have with the client. But the point of this question, I think, was to say, are you guys working to keep us from having a change order?
And something that can come up with is if a client, once they see a building going up and they come out there and look at something that said, I thought it was going to look like that.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because what I think we do a really good job of that, Rich, James, yourself, what we do a good job of, just like you see on the screen, is putting together these types of renderings.
Right.
We do a lot to make sure that as best as you can, what this is going to look like before it's built. So this rendering is from a concept in St. Simons, but if this was under construction today, you'd be able to see what this looks like. You have some scale, you have some vegetation, you have some color contrast, you have some really high definition images here. So yeah, we're trying to avoid change orders by giving our clients as much visualization ahead of time so that they are very comfortable with the colors, with the look, with the style before.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I mean, we can actually create what we call a walkthrough. This is an image that's just that.
This is a static image.
But we can actually create where you're walking around the entire building, or even inside of it.
Again, that's all of these things we're doing to avoid change orders.
Exactly.
Because we pride ourselves in making sure that design is something that the client has been able to articulate to us. Then that design is also something that they've been able to see along the way visually, so that they're not surprised by anything. We don't want surprises. We want we want connection and synergy with our clients.
Amen.
So with that said, I actually want to get to some of the questions that we had. I'm going to leave that. Well, I'm going to go back. Let me go back to this slide. I do have some questions that were submitted to us, Christopher, if you'd like to go through them. Yeah. So let me just ask you the first one I had. It's from Vivian Poley. She was asking, how much do you think the intricacies of the design depend on the location? So I guess she's wanting to know, does the location affect how complicated that design can be, or how much does the location affect the design?
Some locations are considered what we call hurricane zones.
Okay.
That's primarily on the coastal areas. That's where if a hurricane was to come in through that area, that will affect what we've designed on the structure. The ability for that building not to just go flying through the air. I mean, it doesn't keep us from having tornadoes tear up a building. Those still happen because the tornadoes impact is much higher.
Right.
But intricacies, I think, based on location, is more about that. Now, there can be what we call historic preservation areas.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. Yeah.
And that's where you have to fit into that historic elements.
Yeah. So that's actually a really good question, Vivian, because we do run into that. So the location could be geographical. I mean, well, it is geographical, but it could be affected by what's unusual to that geography. Is it a hurricane zone? Is it a floodplain? Is it close to the coast? Is it up in the mountains? Yes, that will affect the intricacy, but also from an aesthetic point of view, when we're looking at a historical area, then yes, the design that we bring about is going to be affected by the location. If it's in a historical part of Atlanta, is it in an area where there's an HBC or a historical preservation committee that's going to want to see a certain design and a certain style? So yeah, very good question.
And I might mention this too, is whenever a client is looking for a site, we always recommend a lot of due diligence before they purchase that site.
Right. There can be intricacies based on where the soil is or where the
river or streams or whatever.
And I think that's important to point out because we as a firm make sure that we ask those questions early on.
Yes.
We're eager to take on every job that fits our wheelhouse. But we also know that if we get far along in the process and don't ask good questions up front and do the due diligence up front, it will bite us later on in the process. So we want to avoid that. Yep. That's a good question. Thank you, Vivian Poli, for submitting that. Our good friend Pete Dubuis also submitted a question. How many stories can you build with wood framing?
We've actually built a lot of buildings out of wood framing. There's some elements that are really critical though. If there's parking beneath that building, like you wanted to do wood construction above the parking, there has to be a podium built out of concrete so that separation is about the fire separation. A lot of times whenever you get into a larger building, multiple stories, that's also where fire protection has to come in for sprinkler systems and all that kind of stuff too. And they have fire rated materials that they can do in wood these days too. So all of those things allow us to get up to the higher floors. I've done buildings up to 5 floors typically, and there's a group out there that's called Woodworks that they're trying to get multiple stories. But it's still another fire question because of how much you could build and how tall. And fire separations, those are always the critical, like I was just saying about parking. An automobile can catch on fire and that explodes and goes through the floor.
Yeah. So there are a lot of considerations to go into how high that wood building can be built. Yeah. So I guess the short answer is it depends.
Yeah. But that's a good answer.
But typically, what you're seeing, like you said, 5 stories was the biggest. Wood
typically,
frame.
what you do is a 5-story.
Okay, limited to that about. Thank you, Pete. Also.
In fact, the next lady that's coming up is Anna Henson. She knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so
she was involved in our Town Square project in downtown Decatur.
Yeah, so Anna Henson did send in a question to us by email. So thank you, Anna, for your support and for the question here. She said, how involved is an architect in the bidding process for construction? So when it comes to bidding for those contracts.
And we're talking about through the contractors, not.
Yeah,
are you talking about different projects?
Looks like if a client is involved in the bidding process for their own construction, she's wondering, is the architect heavily involved in that process?
That's what we try to do in that first two phases. We try to get the client involved with at least 3 contractors.
Yeah.
And these are going to be contractors. We don't recommend contractors unless we know a lot about them.
Right.
We don't want to give them out to a client who hasn't had some experience with them before.
So we base that on good relationships. So
yes.
Anna, to answer your question, I'd say we are heavily involved in we're involved in the sense that we will make sure that you have a good recommendation.
Yes.
If you need information from us as far as anything that would help project those costs, or if you want to run the quotes by us, and we can give you some assessment on whether they've asked all the right questions and covered all the right things in their contract. We usually help that way too, but we do have people that we recommend on a case-by-case basis, depending on the project, because some contractors are better for residential, some are better for restaurants, some are better for senior living. Just kind of depends, but we try to keep a good stable of relationships that we keep on hand so that we can answer those concerns easily. So yes, Anna, we do get involved as far as recommending good, reputable third-party people that we know and trust. And a lot of those people will be on these calls, and we recommend them and mention them from time to time. So thank you, Anna. The next question, I'm going to skip to one from Chris Mayer from Cooper. He is asking, how does an architect interact with third-party interior designers? Or are there instances in which the architect fosters both positions under one roof? So no, we do not. I'll start the answer, Chris. We do not do interior design ourselves. We strategically partner with interior designers. So we do have a few, depending again on the project and the type of project. We have different interior designers that we will bring in. But yeah, how do we interact?
And a lot of times a client will actually bring their interior designer involved too. We've had some that have brought interior designers in from New York City.
Yeah.
And in that recommendation, it was kind of interesting because they were recommending a certain type of restroom, and we submitted that to the city, and they said no.
Well, so in that interaction, so we had to adjust the design a little bit based on the. So how do we collaborate with an interior designer?
It's a close relationship. We try to make sure they have all the floor plans to work from. We give them interior renderings to work from. They come back with the furniture, the finishes, the materials that are going to go throughout the ceiling, the floor, all those kind of finishes.
Yeah.
And some of those things can be related again to handicap issues. So about slip resistance and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I would say we do work pretty closely with an interior designer. We want to be in lockstep with interior designers. In fact, coming up, we will be doing a Q&A on our next, not our next one, but on April 17th, we'll be doing a Q&A for Ask an Architect with Melissa Banco. And she is an interior designer. So some of those questions might come up as far as how we interact. So Chris, I would recommend you tune into that Ask an Architect webinar as well. But yeah, I would say to Christopher's point, we do want to work closely with interior designers so there's a cohesiveness. So we're not getting a rejection later down the road, and so that there's also a good relationship between client and that third party, the interior designer, and us. We want to make sure that that's a success. Anything to add on the subject of interior design, Christopher?
Well, I would say James has been very involved in furniture design, and that's a young man that works for our team.
Yeah, so James Knight, one of our project leads. So furniture is a little bit different. It's in the same vein as interior design.
Correct.
But yeah, we actually do furnish that in-house, no pun intended, but we actually do have somebody on staff who, for our clients, we can actually service them that way too. So in some cases, we work that closely in-house with furniture. It's a little different than interior design. But yeah. My last question I had, Colin, I'm going to apologize if I mispronounce your last name, but I'm going to take my best stab at it. It's Colin Jezerowski. I hope I said that correctly. But Colin asks, for some digital models with uncommon pieces, and I guess he's saying uncommon elements, building design elements, would you use software like Revit or Cinema 4D? So my initial answer, and then Christopher, you can color it in a little bit more, but we use Revit.
Yes.
That is our go-to application for floor plans, elevations. All of our design work is done in Revit, including a lot of our 3D perspectives, interior and exterior perspectives. Revit's what we use to design.
Well, and we use another software, which is what this rendering is came from. It's called Lumion.
And then, yeah, Lumion is the next one that we use. So we do not use Cinema 4D. Sometimes we've used Adobe products for design, but our two go-tos for design are Revit for all of these schematics, elevations, floor plans, some 3Ds. Before that, extra flair for what you're seeing on our screen, the really, really nice renderings with some very photorealistic elements to them. That's where Lumion comes in handy. Now, we do use Lumion not just for complicated designs, but really when we're talking about a bigger concept. So when somebody has a bigger project or a bigger dream or something that they want to sell to, say, an investment team or a partner or a community, and they're looking to raise capital or raise support, there's a lot of case studies and a lot of reasons why these types of renderings are so handy. But this is one of our go-tos for those more unusual elements, or when we're in the concept phase trying to get some visualizations for what it looks like. So how else do we use Revit, Christopher? Or is there anything you want to add to Colin's question?
Well, Revit is a very useful program. I started using it like maybe 5-6 years ago. And I was on AutoCAD from the 80s. But Revit is so much better. It does a much more universal approach to putting together the building when we need to.
Yeah.
Because I can put all the elements together.
Yeah.
Whereas CAD was all a two-dimensional type thing. You had to do a floor plan, then you had to create an elevation, but you couldn't create perspectives from it.
Yeah. So we've been able to have a more integrated approach with our design for that reason. So that's a good question, Colin. And I know that there are students, some of them that we met at Decatur High School, and we're looking for aspiring architects. So wanted to mention that to you guys too, the folks of you who have joined, those of you who've joined that are aspiring architects or students of architecture. I want to let you know kind of the tools that we use.
And it's not that we would never look at a new software out there. There's always new software coming out. If we find something that's better, then sure.
Yeah, those are our tools today.
Yeah.
So with that said, Christopher, thank you for answering those questions. I learned a lot too, as I always do when we talk, and I appreciate all the insight. And I thank you, everybody who submitted questions. We had some really good questions. We had a lot of good responses. So I appreciate you guys chiming in. With that said, for those of you that are still watching the webinar, please get those submissions in, or tell your, if you have children or people that you know that have children that are indoors a lot, looking for things to do right now since school has been unavailable. What we're looking for is student design. So ages from 3 years old to 18 years old, there's different age groups for the competition. But we're looking for folks who would submit their own designs. It could be clay, Lego, drawing, computer, go try your hand at Revit, whatever you want. We're looking for as many designs as possible. All you gotta do is submit that design on any kind of social media using the hashtag aspiring architect, or you can email it to us, info@baldwinarchitect.com. But by April 17th next week, we're looking to announce some winners, and there'll be a cash prize, and there'll also be a rendering that student will get. They'll actually get to see one of those 3D renderings from Lumion turn their design into a little bit more of a reality. So we're excited about that. So hopefully we'll get a lot of participation there. Christopher, thank you again. With that, we're going to sign off and appreciate everybody attending.
Everybody take care.